A new expansion always sees a massive shakeup in the class power meta. However, unlike retail over the years, we already have a pretty good idea of what classes are going to be good for how long and exactly why you will want them in your raid. And if we were to look at the classic trilogy of vanilla, TBC and Wrath of the Lich King, I'd say Wrath quite easily has the most semblance of balance across the board. But with the nature of MMOs and optimization, there's always going to be something which is the best. Fortunately in Wrath though, the best isn't quite so easily defined. Back in Classic we had Mage, Warriors and Rogues. In TBC at the moment we have Hunters and Warlocks, though Mages and Warriors are also doing very well. And Wrath of the Lich King we have, well, it's kind of hard to say. Shamans are good early, all 3 DK specs do well throughout the whole game. Warlocks are great, and there just isn't really any one class you can single out and say, these guys just aren't going to do well at any point throughout the expansion. It's one of the things that I think makes Wrath worth looking forwards to. You can't really go wrong with whatever you pick. The idea of the class that you're only ever going to bring for utility is not quite gone. However, it's much less of a thing than it is in TBC. There are only really 2 examples of you must have this exact one class in your raid for this one specific buff, and those are Heroism from Shamans and a new talent from Demonology Warlocks called Demonic Pact that gives your raid a large spell power buff that scales with the Warlock's own spell power. Many strong class buffs are now shared across a number of specs rather than only ever being from one source. 5% spell crit can either be from an Elemental Shaman or a Boomkin, 10% attack power can be from an Enhancement Shaman, a Blood DK or a Marksman Hunter, and so on. It's more about building the comp that makes sense for the patch, the raid size you're running, and covering as many buffs as you can, which synergize with what you have. But much like vanilla and TBC though, not all classes are made equal. Some are much harder to replace, and let me tell you, it's not worth losing your hair over fretting about your class's choice, thanks to today's sponsor. Do you sometimes look at your character you play and wonder, is this such a fantasy game after all? Well, Keeps is here to help. It's a clinically proven treatment to combat symptoms of hair loss, which has a track record of improvement for most customers within the first 6 months. The majority of guys will experience some form of hair loss by the time they hit 35, which I'm pretty sure is the average age of most TBC raiding guilds now. And whilst your character gets to go to the barbershop in Wrath and magic their hair back in real life, it's better to not wait until it's too far gone. Keeps offers expert quality care and service without having to take the time to visit a doctor's office or pharmacy. The plans they offer have been medically verified and are delivered straight to your door, making it much more convenient. Keeps helps you find a routine that makes sense for you and your schedule. So whether it's taking early prevention methods or just trying to stimulate growth, Keeps will have you covered. Hair loss stops with Keeps. To get 50% off your first order, go to keeps.com/WillE or click the link in the description. That's keeps.com/WillE. Many thanks to Keeps for the sponsor. Let's talk Wrath. The single biggest change in class demand from TBC to Wrath will be how many Shamans you want in your raid. Shaman players, I'm going to tell you how it is, it doesn't get better than TBC for how easy it is to find a raid spot, pretty much at any point ever throughout the history of WoW. Heroism and totems being group wide makes Shamans absolutely irreplaceable in the current version of the game, and you want to try as much as you can to ensure that you have at least 5 Shamans all of the time. In the run up to TBC launching, I predicted the most in-demand class and spec would be a Resto Shaman, if not just a Shaman by itself, and I think that that's been the case. In Wrath, you don't really need 5 Shamans in the raid, and much like TBC, one of their DPS specs does not scale particularly well, that being Elemental, and other classes can either bring the same buffs or actually just better buffs than they can. Enhancement is still solid, as is Restoration, but not super mandatory to have in your raid as they are in TBC. You will at least always want one Shaman though. Heroism or Bloodlust is still the single strongest cooldown ever made in the history of World of Warcraft by a very long way. If everybody currently on a Shaman though continues onwards, there's going to be a few more than there'll be raid spots for, I think. Hunters remain a strong DPS choice, either playing survival early and transitioning to marksman later on as they gain more armor penetration. Hunters are currently a very popular choice in TBC because of their powerful single target damage and excellent scaling. The biggest difference is Beast Mastery goes from the best DPS spec to kind of nobody plays it anymore. Their playstyle also changes significantly from managing clipping shots to being more cooldown and rotation based. You'll need reliable hunters that are good on communications because of misdirection. it's still a unique skill because it can be used from a ranged position to get adds to the tank quickly and avoid issues. I think hunters are going to naturally see a drop off from how many are played, since there are other choices for people chasing the top of the damage meters in Wrath. Priests are still fantastic healers, though Discipline actually becomes a much more popular choice to play in PvE. This requires good fight knowledge as they heal preemptively through shielding so that damage never happens. Holy Priest just isn't really played as much in Wrath. It's not that it's bad, it's just other healers do the thing it does a little bit better, which is raw healing power. So you may be looking at a change of specialization in Wrath as a priest healer. You still absolutely want a shadow in your group, not as a mana battery anymore though, other classes can do that as well. They're a solid DPS, they have excellent survivability through dispersion, as well as bringing a number of buffs and debuffs. It's kind of similar to how they are in TBC. You need one, but only really ever one. As for demand, I'd say priests are about the same. A good pick, more utility focused however. Mages, well, they have done way better than we expected in TBC. Mage players might even stick out playing the whole of TBC as Arcane if Fire can't beat it in Sunwell gear, which is unexpected, and because of how well they can do in top meters, they attract a lot of attention and rerollers. It's going to be the exact same in Wrath of the Lich King. Mages start strong as Arcane, providing massive burst windows on short encounters, which makes them really fun and powerful, later on transitioning to play Fire, which needs a bit more crit to work. Also, fire mages have pretty much absolutely zero raid responsibility other than doing damage, and they're very easy to play, and you can top the DPS on them. There's going to be a lot of mages, like really a lot. Will there be enough raid spots for them? Well, you can certainly bring more than one, so perhaps there will be, just about. Warlocks, my class. Well, Warlocks, Wrath of the Lich King is a very good expansion for us. Affliction may be the single most consistently strong DPS spec in the game from start to finish. There is never a raid or a tier where you do not want an Affliction lock. They do a lot of damage, they scale well, they have unique utility in Soulstone and Healthstone. Their execute phase is amazing thanks to a rework to drain soul. They bring good buffs and debuffs, and yeah, just everything you could possibly want. This is a great DPS spec. Demonology is one of the you really want at least one in your raid at all time specs, thanks to their unique buff Demonic Pact, which we mentioned before. You should being the key word here, also get funneled upgrades as a priority. An upgrade to the Demonology lock is technically an upgrade for every single class that uses spell damage. Demo, however, should fall off in damage somewhat later in the game compared to Affliction. As for Destro, it's more of a PvP thing now. I'd say Destro has had a good run in Vanilla and TBC though. If TBC made Warlocks popular, Wrath of the Lich King will make it even more so. Expect a lot of demand and raid spots for the purples in Wrath. Rogue. Rogue. The fall from Classic to TBC hurt, though they are starting to really prove themselves again in Tier 6 content. In Wrath though, can we expect to really see more than one yellow class per raid? Well, I guess, if you have them, sure. Rogues have two PvE specs, Assassination, which is not totally garbage anymore, and is a very consistently strong single target spec with low gearing requirements, and Combat, which excels in cleave and scales better in late game gear, especially armor pen. You do want a rogue in Wrath of the Lich King though, and there are more reasons to bring them now other than the debuffs which they give, because they get their own version of misdirect called Tricks of the Trade, except this also buffs the target's damage by 15% for the duration as well. Often in Wrath, rogues would use tricks on each other to share the buff around, because 15% damage on a tank sometimes isn't very exciting. Still, rogues are just such a popular class fantasy. They always have been. I don't think there's a version of WoW that doesn't have more rogues than you really need. Druids, I'll keep it short. It's the same as TBC. One of each is great for your raid comp. As for the 10-mans, it depends what kind of build you're going for. Feral obviously fits melee better, while boomies are better for casters. Out of all three, I expect a lot, and I mean a lot of people to at least want to try Feral. This spec gets so much better in Wrath of the Lich King, though it does have a considerably higher skill cap than many other classes do, due to how many different buffs and debuffs you need to be juggling at the same time. Feral tanks are still good, but they won't be as good as they are in TBC anymore. As for boomies, they have super powerful AoE, solid single target damage, and I just can't wait to get into an LFG with a boomie and have them pull the entire room with Starfall. You just know it's gonna happen, don't you? Resto is Resto. They're just a solid healer. You want them in your raid. I don't really have much more to say on them. And of course, Druid brings the standard Druid utility with a combat res and innovate. Oh, also, they now have a normal resurrection. Thanks, Bliss. Only took you 4 years. On to the last 3 then, the Plate Boys, Warriors. Yeah, there's gonna be way too many. Whenever has there not been a version of WoW with too many warriors? Again, much like TBC, warriors are supposed to be weak early, but scale insanely well with gear. DPS-wise, expect a lot of competition for warrior spaces. By the time we're hitting the end of the expansion, I expect them to be living up to the hype for sure. Oh, in Wrath there's this little weapon as well called Shadowmourne you might have heard of, which all 3 plate DPS will be after. Prot warriors don't get a good reputation in Wrath of the Lich King at all. I don't think they did in the start of TBC either, and they've been fine throughout. It's just people tend to overlook things if they aren't considered the best. I think I can say they're not what they once were in Classic anymore, and there are largely better options, but they're fine if you still want to run them. Paladin. Okay, here we are. If you main a Paladin, I think you are playing the most in-demand class in Wrath of the Lich King, and it's just not even close. You are the new Shaman. That's the level of how many Paladins people will want. Specifically, Holy Paladins. There isn't a huge amount of them being played in TBC, and you really want a Holy Paladin in Wrath, if not 2 of them with your 25-man group. They are insanely powerful and just have so many buffs and can absolutely pump heals. Also, small side note, Valanir scales the best with Holy Paladins, just a little extra thing to think about there. You want Paladins for blessings, for auras, for judgments. Prot Paladins are the best main tank by a margin of a very large amount. They are kind of broken in Wrath of the Lich King. Just like Holy, so many bonuses for the raid, insane survivability, raid-wide defensive cooldown, strong single target and AoE threat. You just want a prot paladin in every single raid group ever. And Retribution. Ret, I think, is going to be a very oversaturated DPS spec. I believe they are the single class and spec which can provide the most overall buffs in one package. It's either 5 or 6 separate buffs depending on what else you brought. I also feel as though people are remembering how broken Ret was early as a benchmark for the spec, but it won't be until you get your tier 10 2 set, which is Icecrown Citadel by the way, until you start doing really broken things. Still, it's never bad to have a Ret in the raid. Which means we end on the new class, the Death Knight. They're kind of like Druids, 1 of each, all day, every day. Frost DKs are sometimes referred to as better enhancement Shamans, as they bring similar buffs but often just outperform them. In PvE they dual wield and have strong single target damage and AoE burst. Unholy scales very well. They use a big 2-hander and have strong single target cooldowns and very good AoE. Also, 1 Unholy is exceptionally good for cleaving counters, as they can spread the magic damage debuff super fast, so that your casters can focus on blasting, not debuffing. Blood DKs have the best single target threat, a huge amount of cooldowns, and don't need to hide behind no shield. I played a Blood DK casually in Wrath when it was live, and always loved how much control you had over your own health bar, rather than hoping a heal was going to land and top you up. Obviously, DKs on Wrath launch were way overtuned and they got gradually nerfed throughout the expansion, but they still remain powerful. And if you don't think Death Knights are going to be mega overrepresented in Wrath, then you'll be in for a surprise, but I think all the same there will be enough raid spots for the influx of the new class. And that's it. Like we started with, you can't honestly go too wrong whatever you pick. It's just that some classes and specs do a little bit better than others. The full videos on each class will be done at a later date, of course, where I'm going to expand on everything here and give you a lot more detail on what your class does well and why. Soon TM. Let me know your thoughts on everything, as well as what you're thinking about playing at the moment. I know I'm carrying on with the Warlock, maybe even 2 Warlocks, 1 demo, 1 AF, perhaps a Feral if I can fit that in as well. They do look very interesting. But that is everything from me. As always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I shall see you all in the next one very soon.